So, welcome to my series where I'm going over the bankruptcy petition. I'm going through each part of the bankruptcy petition exactly the way the courts have it set up on their websites with the forms. So, we just finished going over what is the summary of the bankruptcy petition, which is always important. And once you finish the petition, you should go back to that video and review it just to get tips because it's important. The summary is always a good way to see any sort of red flags that might apply to your case. Now, when we're talking here, Schedule AB, it's just property. That's all it is. Whatever type of asset you have is going to be listed here. Now, I do the bankruptcy petition through software, through Best Case. But when it comes to this, when you're doing the forms, you're going to have to, take out your old trusty calculator if we still have those, if not the one on your phone, to try to figure out because we do have to worry about issues with exemption. But as you can see here, we have to start off with what type of property we're dealing with, what kind of real property. Is it a single home? If it's a duplex, start realizing this isn't going to be protected in bankruptcy. This is not a homestead type property. So we have to worry about that. And of course, depending where you're at, what about all these other types of property? So, for example, timeshares, typically bankruptcy trustees don't want them. For the most part, you can't keep them because it is a monthly expense that if you surrender it, the trustee, you have this if you don't surrender it, you have this extra income that could be available to do a Chapter 13 instead. But 9 out of 10 times, a trustee does not want a timeshare because there's just no value to it. But what about other? Other typically, and now that I'm going, if you go to my blog, bankruptcy.blog, you'll see that I'm going through each state individually where I'm putting in contact information for the courts, trustees, and then I go over the exemptions in detail, including the statutes that you need to know when I'm going or when you're dealing with the exemptions. A lot of states do have protections for cemetery lots. As a matter of fact, I would say most of them, except where I'm from. Let me just put lots here to make it quickly. Except where I'm from in Florida, where that's just considered land. So, for example, in Florida, I could put that in there and say, well, I have a burial plot or cemetery plot. It's worth $10,000. We know it's not going to be protected. Yes, the trustee does take away cemetery plots and sell them. I know, kind of weird. You're now in eternity next to someone else's spouse, but I don't know. I guess you're dead. Does it really matter? We'll leave that for another episode. Now, as you can see in just this, the continuance of the one above, what you have to figure out what the value of the property is. Make sure you know how things are done in your district. In Florida, I can tell you we just go by whatever the property appraiser's office says in that county. It does drive down the price substantially, but it doesn't really matter in Florida, right? Because we have unlimited homestead exemption. But if you're in other states, you definitely have to look into this because it's possible they might use other types of services. And of course, those services are going to do nothing but just increase the value of your property where maybe you now begin to have equity that's non exempt. So keep that in mind. If you are filing bankruptcy on your own and you're not sure what is done, here's a simple solution. Find out who's a bankruptcy lawyer in that town and use the PACER system, pacer.gov. And in PACER, look up whatever cases they have and just see what they put down for property value. They're going to put in there, how that information was obtained. So whatever website it was, you'll be able to figure out, say, okay, they use, XYZ. But again, they'll probably use the county appraiser's office. Okay. Now, when it comes to vehicles, of course, we got to list that. These are assets. Please make sure it doesn't matter that you're keeping your car or your truck. You still have to list it. You list all your assets. Now, what if there's a car in your name, but it's not really yours, right? You did it for a cousin or for your son or daughter, and they're the ones who drive the car and they're the ones who make the payment. Doesn't matter. It's still your asset. The law looks at title, doesn't look at anything else. And so it's an asset in your name. When it comes to the income and expenses on Schedule I, and of course, when you're dealing with the expenses, it'll balance out. Why? Because you will make the adjustments saying that is a car payment that maybe you are paying for and you get reimbursed for, or you're just not making the car payment. The trustee will likely ask that at the 341 meeting. You say the car's in my name, but I don't make the payments. my son or daughter, went off to college or whatever the excuse might be. Now, as to value, how we're figuring this out? Well, you need to figure out. Typically, everybody just uses Kelly's Blue Book, kbb.com. If the number's too high, I suggest you just go to your local dealership, pretend you're going to sell the car, and get a written estimate in writing. Some of these bigger companies, what was the one that used to sell used cars? I forgot, but I think they used to charge $10 for that service. But at least, once someone walks through and says, well, scratch here, dent here, bald tires, whatever, the price starts to drive down drastically. That will eliminate any equity issues that are not exempt when it comes to the bankruptcy petition. Okay. And then, of course, you have to put, there's the issues of liens, which we'll go over that later on when we get to that section of debt, whether secured or unsecured debt. We're going to put the lien amount because that's how we're going to determine how much equity is in the property. Okay. Now, boats, motorhomes, etc., as you see here, we know that's not going to be protected. You have to list it anyway, and at this point, it's going to be surrendered. Have I had clients who've been able to keep a boat or a motorhome? Yes, even motorcycles, but they're non-working. Like I had a client who had an old Harley, but the engine block was cracked, so that's a few $1,000s was of no interest to the trustee. And the same thing when it comes to boats. You have a boat that's sitting in the backyard for 10 years, put it down anyway. It's still an asset. The trustees, when they're going to do an asset search, they're going to find that asset. So you might as well put it down, put non-working condition, and if necessary, have photos ready in case the trustee says they want to see some photos of what this boat or motorcycle looks like. Okay. Now, again, every state is different on how they handle this, but we do have household goods and furnishings that are protected. So you can see there's some of the examples. Now, the issue is, what is the value of this stuff? How do I appraise my sofa? Realistically, I don't care what you paid for it. What counts is how much it's worth today. And how much is it worth today? I don't know. How much would you get at a garage sale? Because that's the magical number. How much would you get if you put it on Craigslist? That is known what we call fair market value. Fair market value is just that. You put up a garage sale sign, yard sale sign, how much are you going to get for it? So I know you paid 1,000, but it is 5 years old. You're not going to get probably not even $100 for it unless it's in perfect condition. So keep that in mind. Electronics, of course, always put that down. We all have computers, laptops, TVs, etc. All that has to be listed. And you can see here the rest of the items that should be listed as well. This includes firearms. Let me make a note now because a while back ago I did do a video on this. Let's not confuse the Second Amendment with bankruptcy. The Second Amendment gives you the right to bear arms. Doesn't give you the right to own it when it comes to bankruptcy. These are two different things. So keep that in mind, because just because the Second Amendment says you can have a whatever type of gun you want to own, that doesn't mean that it's still an asset at the end of the day when it comes to bankruptcy. You'll even see me there with my guns on that video. Now, clothing, same thing. These are used clothing and shoes. How much could this be worth? Not a lot. Jewelry, we have costume jewelry, fake jewelry that, again, minimal value, but you have to put that down. Is a trustee going to take your beloved cat Fluffo? That's the name of one of my cats. No. Are they more interested if you have some sort of unique breed that maybe you're selling the litter, etc.? Of course, that might be the issue. But typically it's a non-issue. A dog is not worth much, means a world to us. They're worth millions of dollars, but in the world of bankruptcy, we're not talking a lot. Cash, is this much of an issue today? I don't know. Typically we put a minimal amount. If I have $5 in my wallet, I'd be surprised. But you just put it in there anyway. Okay, you don't want any headaches. Now, the bank accounts, there is a section later on that we'll go over called SOFA, Statement of Financial Affairs, where we even discuss, or at least SOFA requires you to put closed bank accounts. But of course, you have to put all the bank accounts and also look through them. The number one mistake people make, whether it's a law firm, They just get the bank statements and they don't look for transactions. I do. There could be a lot of transactions there that I find questionable, and then I have to ask the client, what is this about? Why is this even there? So definitely go through your bank statements, even if you're filing on their own, just in case there might be something that, clicks and says, okay, this could be a problem. Now, going back to what I said in the last video, your retirement accounts and pensions accounts are protected, right? Are they always protected? No. The problem is I see people move money from an IRA into their checking account. A lot of times you're saying, well, I'm going through some financial difficulties. I have to hire a bankruptcy attorney. I'm taking out 10 grand. That's wonderful. You can pay the lawyer the 1,500 or 2 grand, and the lawyer is not going to have any problems collecting. That's protected by law. But the other $8,000 sitting there is going to be a problem. I've just told clients, just transfer the money back. There's nothing that prohibits that. Transfers are bad, but not like that. Or if you know you're not going to be filing for 2 or 3 months, and you're going to fall behind on your mortgage, then if that money comes out slowly but surely, then there's not going to be a problem. But it goes back to this issue. This is why we need to check bank accounts. If there's a $10,000 deposit from there, where did that come from? Could be innocent enough. Like I said, it's a transfer. A lot of times I hear, well, my brother, cousin, whatever, family member, just trying to help out. They knew I was going through some issues, so they gave me, some money to get by. That's fine. That's fine. Just spend the money little by little, because again, if you file for bankruptcy and you have all that money sitting there, then you're going to lose it, and that defeats the whole purpose of your family member trying to help you out. Now, I've never really had an issue with security deposits and all that. Trustees are not going to chase that, only for the simple reason is you have to guess. You have to guess how much damage is going to be done to that property when you leave as a tenant. Who knows when you're leaving as a tenant? What if the landlord wants to make a claim to that deposit? So this is kind of nonsense, to be honest with you, but I'll tell you, when you will come across it. If your case is litigated for whatever reason, maybe the trustee, there was over exempt assets and now they're doing a 2004 examination, I guarantee you they're going to mention there's $1,000 in the security deposit, and that's not protected. So it's kind of like it's not protected when at that point, but it is protected when you're going through the bankruptcy process. I know it's a contradiction, but if you look at it from my perspective, how can you take away security deposit from a landlord? The landlord is entitled to that, and he doesn't know yet at what point there are damages. Now, granted, if your lease ends in a week and you're facing this issue and a landlord saying the house is immaculate, they're getting $4,000 back. Now you see when this is an issue. But of all the cases I filed, I've never had a bankruptcy coincide with the termination of a lease. It's not statistically impossible, but just one of those things. Okay. Now these are just other spots that trustees might look into. If there's obviously any patents, anything that could result in some of this money being over exempt and then becoming part of the bankruptcy estate. Typically not an issue, right? But I'll tell you what is an issue: tax refunds. If you file for bankruptcy and you haven't done your taxes, the trustee is probably going to say, hurry up and do your taxes. And when they look at prior taxes and they see a refund, then that's where they make their claim. I've always said that tax refunds are low hanging fruit for trustees. They love that time period of more or less from December all the way through tax season, because they know they can bring in some money. It's easy, it's cash, unlike taking someone's car. You have to sell it at an auction, pay the auctioneer, pay the transportation. It starts to, also, whatever equity's in the car, you start to lose it fast. Versus a tax refund, it gets deposited and we're done. Not a lot of effort there. Like I said, low hanging fruit. Now, family support, we're talking DSO, etc. Whether you're receiving or you're paying, child support or alimony, make sure to include that. You have to include that, and a lot of trustees will also ask for proof of the marital settlement agreement when you upload these documents. Typically, they all want it uploaded into these servers that they have with certain companies, and so you're going to have to provide that. Make sure, again, that everything matches up, including with the summary that we went over in the last video, because that will show you if there's any mistakes pending and if it's something you need to worry about. Insurance policies. Do they want to know if your uncle left you a policy and he's on his deathbed? Yes. Not necessarily an interest in insurance policy because they always ask that at the 341 meeting of creditors, but more along the lines of, is this person dying? It sounds morbid, but that's they want to know, because if they are, then guess what? That money belongs to the bankruptcy estate. So I've had clients who have received inheritances, nothing large, just insurance policies, and I tell them you're going to have to spend the money little by little, and then you can consider filing for bankruptcy. Then, unless you want to use that money to pay off the creditors, it's up to them ultimately. Okay, now the rest of this part here, if there's anything going on with a business. Why? Because obviously, if there is a business that you shut down or in the process of closing down, there might be some assets that are of interest to the trustee. So what type of business? Like always, it depends. I had a client who once had a tire shop, and there were thousands and thousands of dollars in tires as well as equipment and everything else. So it could add up in a hurry for a trustee. So keep that in mind. That's why they're asking about inventory and everything else. And of course, a lot of times, make sure if you're involved with someone, a spouse, domestic partner, where they do have a business, make sure you go to the state website. Look up to see. Sometimes they put you down as a business owner, you don't even know it. And they say you own 50% of the shares. Might be 50% of nothing, but you need to know, because the problem is the trustee will find out this information. And then they'll say, what is company ABC? You're like, I don't know, ABC. That's my husband's company. Why are you asking me that? My husband's in construction. And they say, and you're not in construction? And you see the woman there saying, no, I'm not. I work at an office doing whatever. Say, well, you have an ownership interest in that business. And they're like, that's news to me. The problem is it's not protected. And so if that business is producing money, now your Chapter 7 bankruptcy got real complicated, and the trustee's going to say, we need to look into the business, what the value is, and then ultimately they're going to make an offer to settle that case. So keep that in mind. If you're with someone who has a business, ask questions. If you are on the paperwork, then that's a big stop. Take your name off the paperwork, and you're going to have to file for bankruptcy much later on. Okay. Now, the rest here doesn't deal with your typical Chapter 7 bankruptcy, since we're talking about farming equipment and everything else. But again, this kind of goes back with the summary. Make sure you review everything. Make sure that the numbers add up. There might be some numbers that you just see are clearly a red flag, and then you realize there was a mistake done somewhere. With these forms, it is very easy to make these mistakes. A little more difficult when you use software like I do, since everything populates over. If I put there's $1,000 here, and in the next video when we go over the actual assets that are exempt, you're going to see that it transferred over automatically. But when you're doing these forms, it doesn't obviously transfer, and that's where the mistakes come in. So you always should double and triple check your bankruptcy petition. All right. So thank you for joining me. Let's move on to the next video.